Continuing my journey through the complete Dick Tracy series, I now come to volume 19, 1959 to 1961. Now, I've reviewed a number of these volumes on this channel in the past, and I've talked about my history with Dick Tracy in the past, but just to recap briefly, because some of this is going to be relevant to this review. I discovered Dick Tracy in the early 1990s when, for a brief period of time, Dick Tracy became culturally relevant again because of the big movie that got released starring Warren Beatty. And at that time, a lot of Dick Tracy comic book collections hit the bookstores, and I bought 3 of them. The Celebrated Cases of Dick Tracy, the Dick Tracy Case Book, and there was one other that whose name I forgot, and enjoyed that and was fascinated by the idea of this long-running story with characters who evolved over time and the continuity of it all, and would gladly have read through a complete Dick Tracy collection had it existed at the time, but it did not. So I read what I could get my hands on, but then once I had exhausted that, then I just moved on to other things. This series came out a few years ago, I guess a number of years ago now, but I've been living abroad for most of the past 25 years. So now that I'm finally back in the U.S. and able to access these books through interlibrary loan, I've been going through the ones that my library has access to, and reading through the whole series, or as much of it as I can get from my from interlibrary loan. What I've been discovering as I've been reading through this series is that actually reading through the whole series isn't everything it's cracked up to be. Reading through the whole series involves reading through some of the good periods as well as reading through some of the boring periods. Because when you buy a book like The Celebrated Cases of Dick Tracy or the Dick Tracy Case Book, you're really kind of only getting the best storylines. But there were a lot of storylines over the years. Some of them were really interesting and some of them were not so interesting. And this book contains some of the not so interesting ones. So it was a little bit of a bore to read through this. I mean, you know, it's a comic book, right? So you can't complain about it too much. But it does go on for a bit. Not all of these are interesting. I wouldn't say it doesn't have its points. There are a few interesting things that go on in here. But there's also a lot of just stuff that's not so interesting. These collections, I mean, they're comic books, but they take a bit to read through. They're rather text-heavy for comics. They're a lot of pages through this. So they can be long reads and not always rewarding. However, there are some interesting points in here as well, and I'll try and talk about some of the interesting stuff as I go through it. And the publisher's introductions and afterwards are quite good as well. So Max Allan Collins, who took over writing Dick Tracy after Chester Gould retired, writes the introductions to these, and his introductions are always good. There's a spoiler alert here that you want to read the strips before you read the essay. Why they don't put this in the back then, if that's their intention, I don't know. I guess it's just a law of publishing that these things always have to be at the beginning. But I followed this advice. I read the strips first, and then I went back, and then I read the introduction by Max Allan Collins. I thought Max Allan Collins did a very good job of summarizing exactly what worked and exactly what didn't work in this collection. And to a large extent, I think I had already formed my opinions about it before I read his introduction. And his introduction just confirmed or solidified the opinions I had already formed. But he also had a few good points in here that I hadn't thought of, as well as a little bit of a historical detail that I hadn't realized. And then for more historical detail, there are not one but two afterwards. One by, I don't know who any of these people are, but one Foes, Fashion, and Flies by whoever this guy is, and one of In Pursuit of Sanitation and Sanity by whoever this guy is. But these were both interesting and gave some additional backgrounds to what was happening in the world and what was happening with these strips. And I'll be drawing on some of what was said in these publishers' introductions and afterwards as I go through. So we start off, as most of these volumes do, in the middle of a story. Because for whatever reason, the publishers always, almost always, stop the volume in the middle of a story. And, I guess to be fair to the publishers, Dick Tracy was kind of just one long ongoing story sometimes. But if you remember from volume 18, we have the rodent, who is the villain here, and he's got a face that looks exactly like a rat's face. As was pointed out in the introduction by Max Allan Collins, this one was a little bit too on the nose, this villain. So Dick Tracy villains frequently had grotesque appearances, but this one is pushing things just a little bit too far by giving him exactly the face of a rat. And he's, as we start off, he is wanting to take out Fatty, who is an anorexic girl. She used to be fat and then became very thin because she wanted to be a model. And she has seen what he looks like and is helping the police identify her. So he wants to kill her. So Liz, the policewoman, goes undercover and pretends to be Fatty. And then when the bad guys come to get Fatty, Liz is able to take out the bad guys and dispose of them. Max Allan Collins makes the point in his introduction that since Liz has joined the Dick Tracy team, and she's joined relatively recently, I forget which volume, but one of the past couple volumes, she goes on to take center stage in a lot of these stories, and Dick Tracy kind of becomes an observer in the stories, and Liz is almost the central character. So this will continue. The rodent dies a fiery death in a car accident. Fatty, there's a search for Fatty, but eventually she's found, and she's taken in. Her father has been killed by this time, so she's taken in by some nice farmers who want to fatten her up. And the storyline isn't just abruptly dropped. As Max Allan Collins says in his introduction to these stories, the author Chester Gould was experimenting with different storylines, but when something wasn't working, it just got dropped very abruptly. Then later, there's a storyline involving, well, this is a little bit convoluted, but Liz and television personality character and the brother of the character that Liz killed by flipping out of the window in the previous story, which results in Liz being kidnapped and put in this death trap with this mirror which focuses the sunlight. As Max Allan Collins points out in his introduction, it's noticeable that, in the early or kind of classic Dick Tracy stories, Dick Tracy was put into a death trap by his enemies, which he had to find some way of escaping over the course of a week or a couple weeks. But now it's Liz who's being put in the death trap. So another indication that she's taking center role in these stories, or at least in the stories in the first half of this volume. But before I forget to mention this might be as good a time as any to point out that there was a change made somewhere along the lines a couple volumes ago with the source material for the daily strips. And as a result, these daily strips are not very clean. They look a little fuzzy around the edges of the characters. The Sunday strips still look all right. I've seen some people on Amazon complaining about this and saying that the publishers really should have done a better job of cleaning up these strips. I don't know how easy or practical that is to do, or what their options were for the source material, but anyways. So the villains here are a guy called the Fifth, who always is taking the Fifth Amendment to refuse to testify against himself, and his lawyer, Flyface. And Flyface always is surrounded by flies all of these villains have a gag, and also he has some sort of bad body odor that attracts the flies. But yeah, it seems to me like a bit of a harmless gag. The Fifth's girlfriend is constantly trying to get rid of the flies or spray air freshener around or something like that. But the flies just stick to Flyface. What I found interesting is reading the additional material by the publishers, again, the introduction and the two afterwards, that a number of readers really took offense to Flyface. They found it was disgusting, I guess, that he always had the flies around him, which even resulted in Dick Tracy losing a couple of newspaper subscriptions because of readers' adverse reactions to it. And Chester Gould got a lot of mail complaining about Flyface, etc. So I thought that was interesting, especially for a comic strip like Dick Tracy, which has had so much going on in it. So many brutal deaths, so many shocking scenes over the course of the years, that this in particular was what really set people off. But apparently this in particular was what really set people off. So in spite of all the mail he was getting about Flyface and pressure from the newspapers to get rid of the character, Chester Gould did not get rid of him, and in fact he just kind of doubled down on him. I guess maybe Chester Gould had a stubborn streak with him. So Flyface continues on through these comics, and then we have something which is interesting. Flyface and the Fifth get caught by Dick Tracy and are taken to jail, and here they are in jail, and this is typically like showing them in jail is typically the last panels of the villain arc, and then a new mystery is introduced. And sure enough, a new mystery is introduced with somebody being put into a car and the car being driven off a bridge, and then Dick Tracy finding the car and trying to figure out who this mysterious man was who was injured in the car. So this goes on for a few pages, which I guess was a few weeks in newspaper time. But then, yeah, actually maybe it goes on for longer than I remember. It goes on for, I guess, quite a few weeks. But then we go to a jailbreak where the Fifth and Flyface have engineered some sort of fire and toxic chemical, which allows them to escape from jail. So just when we thought we were done with the Fifth and the Flyface, in fact, we thought we'd been done with them for several weeks, they come back, and now here they are back again. Who knows how much of this was planned out ahead of time. Chester Gould always used to brag that he made up the stories as he went along because he thought those were the best kind of stories. If he doesn't know where the story is going, if he doesn't know how the story is going to end, then how could a reader possibly guess how the story is going to end? Was his motto. But yeah, I'm not sure if he just on a whim decided to bring back Flyface in the Fifth, or if he kind of had an inkling that he was going to do this all along. But yeah, again, given how much negative publicity and pushback he was getting from Flyface, to bring Flyface back several weeks later and relaunch the Flyface storyline, I guess shows maybe a stubbornness in Chester Gould's streak. So the Flyface storyline merges into the other storyline, which is a Hawaiian storyline, where there was a mysterious figure from Hawaii who was unearthed in that car crash. And it eventually ends with Dick Tracy and his crew flying to Hawaii for the end of this storyline. So I'm informed by the afterwards at the end of the book that Chester Gould himself made a vacation to Hawaii around this time, which is the inspiration for this storyline. And Hawaii had only just recently become a state at this point in history. But it's very similar to the previous volume in which Dick Tracy goes to Cuba. And this is a similarity that's very obvious. I noticed it myself, but the publishers also pointed out in the various forewords and afterwords they have on this book. Similar even to the point of having an undercover cop be one of the native... one of the native inhabitants of the island be an undercover cop who aids Dick Tracy. And Flyface and the Fifth are eventually killed by a tidal wave after they ignored the warnings that a tidal wave was coming. And here we just see a last panel of the flies buzzing above the sand, but Flyface is no more. But the Flyface storyline leads into another storyline because while they're in Hawaii, they then find an abandoned girl who was in one of the canoes. And this, figuring out who this abandoned girl is, goes on for several pages, which again is several weeks. Would have been several weeks in terms of newspaper strip time back in its day. But there is money attached to this girl. So that attracts the attention of a supervillain. Sorry, not a supervillain, a villain. Another Dick Tracy villain, Spots. He's got this blank face and then these spots. And he hatches a plan to get his wife to pose as the relative of this girl so that they can steal the money that she has inherited. And this, again, goes on for a while. Goes on for a while, yep. But then his wife, who is impersonating the aunt of this little orphan girl, eventually has a case of her conscience, and she decides that she can't do it anymore. So she goes and she frees the real aunt of the girl who's being tied up by Spots, and takes the aunt to a taxi and has her and the girl get in the taxi and then pays the driver to help them escape. Now, why she didn't get in the car and escape with them, I have no idea. But it leads to her being discovered and then shot by her husband, Spots. And then there's a dramatic scene here where Spots chases the cab where the girl and her aunt are and forces them off the bridge. So, you know, I was complaining at the start of this video about how boring this book was, but let it not be said that it doesn't have its moments. If that's not a double negative. Does that sentence make sense? This book definitely does have its moments. And then Spots and his poet friend end up hanging out in a tank where they are there for several weeks. And yeah, again, this book does drag on sometimes. Several weeks here, they're stuck in the tank. The bees come. It looks like there's going to be something with the bees, but then they get the bees to go away. But then the story takes another dramatic left turn. And again, maybe this is a result of Chester Gould making these stories up as he goes along. While our villains are hiding out here, a mother and her daughter abandon their baby. Or the mother forces the daughter to abandon her baby. And the villains find the baby, realize that the baby has been abandoned by a wealthy family, and go and try to blackmail the family. Now, around about here, some of these characters or some of these lines started to seem a little bit familiar to me. And I was thinking, okay, maybe Chester Gould is repeating himself. Maybe he's done similar characters in the past, or maybe these were reoccurring characters who I've seen in subsequent stories or something like that. So I Googled it and ended up on a Dick Tracy wiki. And it turns out that this storyline, this Spots villain storyline, was reprinted in the Dick Tracy casebook, which is one of those books I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I actually owned in the early 90s. And which I thought I remembered all the stories in there. But apparently I had forgotten the Spots storyline, because apparently this story was reprinted in the Dick Tracy casebook. At some point, maybe I'll try and track down a copy of the Dick Tracy casebook and reread it. Because I don't know. I mean, some of this is familiar, but that whole Hawaiian storyline, that I don't think I read that. And that Hawaiian storyline just drags on for a long time with Spot's character just in the background. So I don't know what date or from which strips these things started to be reprinted in the Dick Tracy casebook. But yeah, I don't know if this is not going to be interesting for anyone else, but it was interesting for me to realize, I had read these stories, some of these strips years before, and completely forgotten about them. You know, I thought I remembered them better, but I guess sometimes you You don't even realize what you'd forgotten about, huh? So, anyways, Spots the villain eventually meets his death. And we have the little boy Beard, who is a baby with a beard. And Max Allan Collins talked about how in his introduction how Chester Gould had such popularity and such marketing potential with the character Sparkle Plenty that he consciously or unconsciously just kept trying to replicate that success, but never was really able to replicate it. So the little orphan girl at the beginning of the Spot storyline from Hawaii was another cute little child that didn't meet with success. The baby with the beard who has super strength is set up to be a real cute character, but I guess didn't meet with success with the public. And then it turns out that little boy Beard is a relative of the Plenty family. Here's Sparkle Plenty, who we were just talking about. Sparkle Plenty has grown a lot since we last saw her. Yeah, I was surprised at how much she's grown, but then it's unclear if these characters are supposed to be aging in real time, or what's going on here. But at any rate, the character has been aged up a lot since we saw her. But then maybe it's been a year or two since we last saw her, because these are newspaper strips, so time is going by. But she's also gotten very fat. She's been eating the corny wheat flakes. So, as Max Allan Collins points out in his introduction, this is Chester Gould maybe treating his breakout character a little bit unkindly, perhaps unconsciously resenting the fact that he hasn't had any other breakout characters with her success. He did have little Wingy, who was also adopted by the B.O. Plenty family and was an adopted younger sister to Sparkle, but he got rid of her off screen, so to speak. We just get this little panel here. Yes, little Wingy's aunt from Australia took her back home with her. So now we've just got Sparkle. So that is the end, I believe, of little Wingy as part of the B.O. the B.O. Plenty family. I think she does return years later when after Chester Gould had retired. But I believe for the rest of the Chester Gould run on the strip, little Wingy now is gone. And yes, here's Sparkle Plenty and little baby Beard, who, as this volume ends, little baby Beard's storyline is still unresolved. We end with the mother and daughter being taken by their aunt onto the river. And the aunt has some sort of nefarious purpose in mind. Maybe she's trying to kill off the baby that her sister had tried to get rid of earlier. But I guess I'll have to read the next volume to figure out what's going on with this. But a trip over to Google and the Dick Tracy wiki reveals that little baby Beard did not appear much in the strip after this. So it was yet another character who was not so successful. And I think that brings me to the end of this video and this review. So, there are interesting things in this book. And certainly going through it and talking about everything, I was reminded of just how many interesting things there are in here. But there's also a lot of slow-moving periods and boring parts in this book as well. But if you're a Dick Tracy completist and you want to get the whole story, I guess you have to read it, see if you can find